The Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise has urged the Nigerian government to implement specific measures in response to the current economic reforms in the country. Now, the organization suggests the introduction of tax incentives for low-income employees and small businesses, as well as reducing import duties on certain products. These measures aim to alleviate the impact of the reforms on Nigerians. Now, under the administration of President Bola Tinubu, several economic reforms have been announced and implemented. The most recent one is the introduction of 7.5% value-added tax on market traders and informal sector participants. Now, these reforms, along with other policies imposing financial obligations on citizens, have prompted the Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise to call for prompt action. So this morning, Dr. Muda Yusuf, Chief Executive Officer, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, joins me to discuss these latest developments by the government and, of course, what it is asking for from the Nigerian government. It's nice to have you join us, Dr. Muda, on the show.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you and good morning to all our viewers.
All right, good morning to you too. Now, the Bola Tinubu-led administration kicked off its 2023 fiscal policy initiatives to shore up revenue generation. Now, these included tax announcements with value-added tax on market traders and other informal sector players. So there are other areas whereby it was able to also bring in some reforms that have to do with the proof of ownership certificate, amongst other policies that this current administration has initiated. I'd like to ask you what your assessment of these various policies is.
Well, thank you very much. These policies are very fundamental to reforming the Nigerian economy because the economy has been grappling with issues of macroeconomic instability, issues of fiscal challenges, high fiscal deficit, debts, exchange rate volatility, and the liquidity in the foreign exchange markets, high inflation, and all of that. These reforms are intended to stabilize the economy and put the economy on the path of growth and the path of recovery, and also promote the growth of investments and attraction of capital into the economy. Basically, these are the issues that the reforms are intended to achieve. And in terms of the specifics of the reforms so far, the two major reforms that are taking place under the Tinubu administration are the foreign exchange policy reforms, which seeks to ensure convergence of exchange rates in the foreign exchange markets, and the fuel subsidy removal, which is a major component of the oil and gas sector reforms. These two reforms are very critical to the recovery of the economy. Of course, they have come with some challenges, which we are hoping that the government will put measures in place to address. The foreign exchange policy before now has created a whole lot of problems, which included lack of liquidity in the foreign exchange market, challenges of lack of transparency in the way foreign exchange was being allocated, challenges of arbitrage. Arbitrage is when you take advantage of moving funds from one market or one market window to another, round tripping and all of that. So this is so bad that even the genuine entrepreneurs were finding it very difficult, to access foreign exchange at the official window. So it created a whole lot of distortions. It became also very difficult to attract capital inflows into the economy. Capital importation collapsed almost completely. Foreign direct investors were not coming in. Foreign portfolio flows were also not coming in because of the distortions at that time in the foreign exchange market. So the reform in the foreign exchange space is meant not just to target revenue, it's meant to stabilize the foreign exchange market, and it's also meant to ensure that we attract more investment into the economy, because the more investments we're able to attract, the better will be our reserves, and the better will also be the stability in the foreign exchange market in the short to medium term. So that is very key. Then the second major reform is the fuel subsidy reform, which is also a component of the oil and gas sector reform, as contained in the Petroleum Industry Act. The reform first is to plug leakages in the oil and gas sector, because there's so much corruption that has been associated with the subsidy regime, and also to be able to attract investment, more importantly, into the oil and gas sector, the downstream sector of the oil and gas sector. Because for so many years, we have been in oil business now for over 60 years. We have not been able to attract any major investor into the downstream because of the policy environment and because of the challenges of insecurity in that sector. So that reform in the oil and gas sector was meant to address those challenges. And before long, at least we begin to see the real benefits of that. But in the short term, at least the first impact will be the fact that we see an improvement in fiscal in the fiscal condition of government. We're going to see a lot more improvement in revenue, and that will also help the government to be able to manage, the macroeconomic issues. So generally, in summary, that is what all these reforms are about. I acknowledge the fact that there are challenges, and the government needs to do something about those challenges.
All right, Doctor, you talked about the fact that these government reforms are aimed at economic recovery and growth. But others have argued that, if you have to break it down now, others have argued that local traders, informal sector players already pay taxes either to their local governments or to the states in the country. So isn't this directive of having to pay 7.5% direct VAT tantamount to multiple taxation? Because we know that the government is trying to widen the tax net and see how much revenue it can get, but then it's going to be at a cost to the citizens.
Well, one thing about this administration is the fact that it has, talked about issues of policy coordination. Because in progressing with these reforms, the administration also needs to be sensitive to the environment. Now, if you take into account the challenges that we are facing currently with these two major reforms that I mentioned, which is the foreign exchange unification and the fuel subsidy removal. First, between these two reforms, we expect at least a revenue of close to 10 trillion naira annually, if we go about it properly. That is the minimum that we expect in terms of additional revenue to government. So with that kind of fiscal space, I don't think it is a good thing to now be talking, especially at this time, about additional taxes on other segments of the economy. Because the pain of the current reform is huge, especially the fuel subsidy, and it's affecting practically all segments of the economy, and even more vulnerable are the SMEs. Those are at the bottom of the pyramid. I'm talking of the citizens now, and those in the informal economy. Because the cost of transportation now is enormous, and it's putting a whole lot of burden on this segment of operators in the economy. So I don't think it is appropriate, especially at this time, for any organ of government to be coming up with any additional taxes beyond what we have currently. It is insensitive to do so. And this is also about issues of political governance. It's about strategy. So my advice is that any additional tax for now, or fees or levies from any government institution, should be put on hold, at least to demonstrate sensitivity of government to the plight of the people.
All right.
What the people are expecting now are the palliatives. The palliatives have not been announced to cushion the effect of some of these things. So while the citizens were waiting for that, we are hearing all manner of people, government agencies coming up with additional taxes and things, electricity, custom duties, and so on. That is not right at all. I think we should allow the citizens to have a breathing space.
All right, you talked about
government should roll out the palliatives.
Okay.
Let us see how we can mitigate the pains of current.
All right, you talked about the amount of money that the federal government has or will be able to save as a result of these policies. And recently, the federal government came out to say that over 400 billion naira had been saved as a result of the removal of subsidy on PMS. But there's this issue of public trust in terms of the handling of revenues by government ministries, departments, and agencies. We don't even know whether the Treasury single account is still in operation. And there have also been cases of fraud, corruption that has characterized past administrations, as the case may be. So are you confident that this government has the pedigree when it comes to accountability and the judicious use of public funds to areas that it has been said it will channel those funds into?
Well, talking about channeling the savings, first, I don't subscribe to the fact that all the savings should go to the coffers of government. No. I believe that part of the savings should come in form of tax concession to the citizens. Anybody earning anything below 200,000 naira and below monthly income should be exempted from income tax as part of the concession. Any small business whose turnover is 30 million and below should be exempted from VAT and company tax. Then I expect to see some concessions with regards to import duty on machineries, on raw materials, and on critical inputs that the manufacturers use. I expect to see concessions and import duty on the importation of vehicles, particularly buses, mass transit buses, and all these 18-seater, 15-seater buses that companies buy for their staff. So these are the kind of concessions that I expect to see. So in terms of giving back to the citizens, we should not throw all the funds into the government hands. We should give back directly in terms of tax concession and import duty concession, so that we can use that to moderate the current inflationary pressure that we have. And in terms of what we give back, of course, some of these savings will have to go to the federation accounts. And that will mean that both the federal government, the state government, and the local government, you have more revenue. So that is where the issue of public trust comes in. As citizens, we need to hold them into account. And I also suggest that these additional revenues, as they are being distributed, they should be published for the citizens to see. We should be able to see publicly how much additional revenue is coming to the federal government, how much is coming to each state of the federation, how much is going to each local government of the federation. So that the citizens will have information on the basis of which they can hold their governments accountable. Because this is a democracy, and democracy is not just about voting for people. It's also about monitoring what they are doing. It's about demanding accountability. So the citizens have a role to play to ensure that we get value from the sacrifice that we are making.
All right, talking about accountability, there are also issues that have to do with having a credible database that talks about or gives information about those who have been captured within the tax net and those who are actually evading taxes, because tax evasion is another conduit by which the government lose revenue. So I'd like to ask, we understand that there could be issues when it comes to determining the percentage of people or businesses that are within a tax net. So how important would you say the issue of data capturing and having the right information about the business environment and all those who are players within the business environment, having that sort of information at the beck and call of government when it comes to tax, when it comes to the creation of laws, policies, and of course the implementation of all these? How important would you say having a database will go a long way in ensuring that we have accurate data along this conversation?
Well, data integrity is very, very important, because without credible data, it is very difficult to implement many of these policies, and it's also difficult to have very quality economic planning. So the integrity of the data is very, very important. And that is one of the reasons, I have concerns about this issue of cash transfers. We have had the phenomenon of cash transfers under the previous administration. We know all the credibility issues that arose from the so-called cash transfers and school feeding program and the rest. So going forward, I think we need to be very careful about these issues of cash transfer because it's highly prone to fraud and it's highly prone to corruption. So I think it is better to spend these savings through some other interventions in education, in health, in public transportation, in giving concessions to citizens by way of tax, by way of import duty. That will reach more citizens than when we talk about cash transfers, because just cash transfers can easily be cornered by those who matter, can easily be cornered by politicians, and is highly prone. The corruption risk is extremely very high. So I'm not excited, I'm not a fan of cash transfers. Then talking about issue of tax and data for tax collection, of course, it's a no-brainer. We need to have credible information about businesses that exist in the country, about individuals, about their incomes, so that we can optimize tax revenue. That is very important. Without a very credible database about businesses, what they do and all of that, the kind of transaction that they undertake, we will not be able to maximize revenue. Because what has happened over the years is that the very few people that are in the tax net, most of them in the formal sector of the economy, those are the people that are paying the taxes, particularly direct taxes. Those are the people. And so each time we are reviewing taxes and all of that, the pressure is always on this very small proportion of taxpayers who are in the formal sector of the economy. So this speaks to the need to review the tax policy and tax strategy. Because if we put too much emphasis on direct taxation, you may not be able to bring everybody into the tax net, because there are some people who are billionaires who don't even have offices. They don't have visible offices. Whereas you see the tax people going after manufacturers because they think they have big premises or big machineries, they feel that they are making a lot of money. And all of them begin to harass this kind of people. So we need to review the tax strategy to bring in more people. And the way to do that, and this is also reflected in the national tax policy, is to look more in the area of indirect taxes, in the area of property taxes, in the area of consumption taxes, and all of that. Because even if you don't have an office, of course, some of them are building mansions, they are riding big cars, they are consuming a lot of things, they are going in business class and all of that. We should target all of that. And we can also check some of that.
Doctor, I'd like to just quickly chip this in. Since you are talking about proper taxation of the informal sector, does that mean that you're in support of this latest development by government saying that it is going to ensure that those who have cars would pay 1,000 naira as proof of ownership for a certificate for the fact that you own a car? And of course, this new idea that's coming up now, a policy as it were, that is coming up now, where market men and women would have to pay certain amounts in form of taxes to the government. So are you also in support of these kind of initiatives if you are talking about ensuring that we tax the informal sector and see how much revenue that can be generated from that area?
No, I'm not in support of all of that. All those ones are going to create unnecessary disruption to businesses. If you go into a marketplace, how are you going to tax them? How are you going to assess their capacity? It's very disruptive. The way to go about taxation, particularly income tax, is to begin to look at the structure of income distribution. You should be able to have a structure where, because ideally, almost 80% of the wealth are in the hands of just about 10 or 15% of the population. So about 80% of the revenue from income tax should be coming from just about 20% of the population, or even 10%, given the kind of income inequality that we have. That is the way it is in many of the advanced economies. The bulk of the taxes is coming just from just about 15% of the people. They pay almost 80% of the taxes. I mean, what is the use of going to Balogun market or going to Jankara market or going to Alaba market and say you want to collect tax? No. We should be focusing more on, taxes maybe at the point of entry, at the point of consumption and all of that. Those are the things. And this is not the time to introduce new taxes. Yes, we can ensure, compliance on existing taxes. Okay. But going after all these small people at this time will not give much. The cost of collection will be more than the amount of money.
All right, Doctor, let's just wrap it up now. I understand your standpoints. Now, earlier on, you talked about these government policies that are meant to actually shore up the value of the naira and, of course, foreign exchange. So, sequel to the floating of the naira, some analysts were saying that the currency is now undervalued. So, do you agree with that postulation? Is the naira better off or worse off now?
No. You see, it will take time for the market to stabilize and come to equilibrium. This policy is barely a month old. And before now, we had a huge backlog of foreign exchange demand that have not been met. So it will take time for this demand, this backlog to dissipate. By the time it dissipates, we expect the exchange rate to settle at a far lesser level than what it is, possibly around 700 or thereabout, or something close to it. So we need to give it time. We need to allow the backlog of demand, which is exerting a lot of pressure on the I&E window, to dissipate. Once that happens, we see the exchange rate settling at a much lower level and at a more sustainable level. So we can say yes, possibly the current rate is not a true reflection of what the rate is, but it will take time for the equilibrium level of exchange rates to be achieved, maybe in 3, 4, 5, before the end of the year. We see something that is closer to equilibrium and that will give us some comfort.
All right. Thank you very much, Doctor. We see that it's not just about formulating policies. It's about creating policies that directly address the critical and fundamental challenges of an economy, so as it will bring reprieve to the citizens. I think that is basic for every government. We appreciate your presence on the show.
Thank you.
Now, the Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise wants the current administration in Nigeria to promptly implement pro-citizen and pro-economic measures aimed at addressing the social consequences of its recent reforms, as that is the only way to mitigate the rising cost of living and the increasing operating and production costs, especially for the country's business environment. That is an initiative that the government will need to take up, even as it continues to implement its policies. When we go on a short break and return, we will bring you international business headlines.